The phone call I accidentally overheard last Tuesday afternoon shattered everything I thought I knew about trust and friendship. I was coming back from the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I heard my friend Diana's voice drifting through the kitchen window she'd left cracked open. She was staying with me for what she'd called a difficult time in her life, and I'd welcomed her with open arms, like I always did. But the words that reached my ears made my blood run cold. Yes, I really think Margaret needs professional help. She's been acting so erratically lately, and I'm genuinely concerned for her safety. This shocking tale will amaze you, so please support with a like and subscription. Tell me what part of the world you're from. I never imagined I'd be sharing something this personal, but one small detail blew the whole thing open. On the people closest to me. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 48 years old, and until that moment, I thought I had my life reasonably well organized. Sure, I'd been going through some stress lately. My freelance graphic design business had hit some rough patches, and I'd been working longer hours to make ends meet. But erratic? Dangerous? The words felt like a slap across the face. I stood frozen on my front porch, grocery bags cutting into my arms, listening to my friend of 15 years paint a picture of me that I barely recognized. Diana Walsh had been my closest confidant since our kids were in elementary school together. We'd weathered divorces, career changes, and family crises side by side. When she'd shown up at my door 3 weeks ago, tears streaming down her face, talking about needing space from her own family drama, I hadn't hesitated to offer her my guest room. Now she was on the phone with someone, and from the tone of her voice, this wasn't a casual conversation. Margaret's been forgetting things, getting confused about simple tasks, Diana continued, her voice carrying that concerned, pseudo-professional tone she used when she wanted to sound authoritative. Yesterday, she couldn't remember where she put her car keys, and last week she seemed genuinely lost when I asked her about her work schedule. I think she might be having some kind of breakdown, but she's too proud to admit it. My hands were trembling now, and it wasn't from the weight of the groceries. Those incidents she was describing, they were completely normal moments that she was twisting into something sinister. Yes, I'd misplaced my keys, but I'd found them 5 minutes later in my jacket pocket, and I'd been confused about my schedule because I'd been juggling 3 different client deadlines and was genuinely exhausted. Diana had been there for both moments, had seen me resolve them without any real difficulty, but now she was presenting them as evidence of mental instability. I know it's hard to hear, she said to whoever was on the other end, but I really think we need to consider more intensive intervention. She's isolated herself from most of her friends. She's not taking care of herself properly. And honestly, I'm worried about what might happen if we don't act soon. The grocery bags finally slipped from my nerveless fingers, and cans rolled across the porch with a clatter that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet afternoon. I fumbled to gather them up, my mind racing. Isolated myself from friends? I'd been working extra hours to keep my business afloat. But that was temporary, responsible behavior, not social withdrawal. And not taking care of myself? I glanced down at my appearance. Admittedly, I was in comfortable clothes and hadn't bothered with makeup for a grocery run, but I was clean, healthy, and perfectly functional. The conversation inside had gone quiet, probably because Diana heard the noise I'd made. I quickly unlocked my front door and slipped inside, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Diana's voice resumed, quieter now, and I could only catch fragments. Committed for evaluation and family intervention and legal options. I made it to my bedroom and sat heavily on the bed, groceries abandoned in the hallway. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I'd just heard. Diana wasn't just gossiping about me or expressing casual concern to a mutual friend. This sounded coordinated, planned, like she was building a case. But a case for what exactly? And who was she talking to? 20 minutes later, I heard the front door close and Diana's car pull out of the driveway. I waited another 10 minutes before emerging from my room, needing time to compose myself and figure out what to do next. The house felt different now, like a place where I was being watched and evaluated rather than the comfortable sanctuary it had always been. I picked up the scattered groceries and tried to go through the normal motions of putting them away, but my hands kept shaking. Every interaction I'd had with Diana over the past few weeks was taking on a new, sinister cast. Her constant questions about how I was feeling, her offers to help with simple tasks I was perfectly capable of handling myself, the way she'd started documenting our conversations in what she called her journal, but now seemed more like evidence collection. The worst part was the seed of doubt she was planting. Was I actually okay? I'd been tired, stressed about money, occasionally forgetful in the way that anyone juggling multiple responsibilities might be. But suddenly, I was second-guessing every small stumble, every moment of fatigue, every time I'd had to ask Diana to repeat something because I'd been distracted by work thoughts. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Sarah Collins, and my stomach clenched. Sarah lived about an hour away and called regularly, but we'd been playing phone tag for the past week because of my work schedule. The text was simple. "Mom, can we talk tonight? Diana called me earlier, and I'm a bit worried about you." There it was. Diana wasn't just making phone calls to strangers or casual acquaintances. She was reaching out to my family, spreading her concerns, building her case with the people who mattered most in my life. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. Sarah and I had a good relationship, but like any adult child, she worried about her aging parent. Diana's concerns would carry weight, especially presented in that caring, worried friend package. I stared at the text for a long time before responding. "Of course, honey. I'll call you after dinner. Everything's fine, just busy with work." But as I sent the message, I realized that everything was definitely not fine. My friend was systematically undermining my credibility with my own family, painting me as mentally unstable, and apparently exploring legal options for some kind of intervention. I had no idea how far this had gone or who else she'd contacted, but I knew I needed to find out fast. I made myself a cup of tea with hands that were finally starting to steady and tried to think through the situation logically. Diana would be back eventually. Her suitcase and most of her belongings were still in my guest room. When she returned, I'd have to act like nothing had happened, like I hadn't overheard her devastating phone call. But in the meantime, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with and figure out how to protect myself from someone I'd trusted completely. The afternoon sun was slanting through my kitchen windows, the same light that had illuminated countless conversations with Diana over the years. But everything felt different now. I was seeing my own life through her eyes, wondering what other innocent moments she'd catalogued as evidence of my supposed decline. One small detail blew the whole thing open. I walked back to Diana's room, my tea growing cold in my hands. I told myself I was just checking to make sure she hadn't left anything important behind, but truthfully, I needed to understand who I was really dealing with. The woman who had been my closest friend for 15 years, or someone I'd never truly known at all. Her suitcase sat open on the bed, clothes neatly folded inside. Diana had always been organized, almost compulsively so. I remembered teasing her about color coordinating her sock drawer, but now that attention to detail felt sinister. What kind of notes had she been taking about my behavior? What small moments had she been cataloging as evidence? On the nightstand, partially hidden beneath a magazine, I spotted the corner of a small notebook. My heart hammered as I pulled it out. Diana's careful handwriting filled page after page, dated entries going back months. Not a journal exactly, but something far worse. March 15th. Left coffee pot on for 3 hours after leaving kitchen. Didn't seem to notice burning smell until I mentioned it. March 26th. Forgot we had dinner plans, insisted we'd never made them, became agitated when I showed her the text confirmation. April 3rd. Couldn't remember Sarah's husband's name during phone call. Had to ask me twice who Sarah was talking about. My hands shook as I flipped through more pages. Every small human mistake I'd made over the past months had been recorded, analyzed, and presented as evidence of cognitive decline. Things I'd forgotten. Moments that seemed insignificant in the context of a busy life, but looked damning when compiled into this careful inventory of my supposed deterioration. But what made my stomach turn wasn't just the documentation itself. It was seeing how Diana had interpreted perfectly normal moments through the lens of someone building a case. The coffee pot incident? I'd been rushing to get ready for a work call and simply forgot to turn it off. The dinner plan's confusion? I'd legitimately never received her text because of a phone service outage that day, something she'd conveniently omitted from her notes. The most recent entry was dated yesterday. Behavior becoming more erratic. Seems paranoid, asking strange questions about conversations. May need to accelerate timeline. Accelerate timeline for what? I flipped to the back of the notebook and found what I was looking for. A list of phone numbers with check marks beside most of them. Sarah Collins, my brother Tom, my neighbor Mrs. Chen. Even my boss at the marketing firm where I worked part-time. At the bottom of the list, in Diana's precise handwriting, Dr. Morrison, involuntary commitment consultation, Tuesday 2nd p.m. Tomorrow. She had an appointment tomorrow to discuss having me committed against my will. I sank onto the bed, the notebook falling from my numb fingers. This wasn't the impulsive concern of a worried friend. This was a calculated, months-long campaign to systematically undermine my credibility and build a legal case for questioning my mental competency. But why? What could Diana possibly gain from this? My phone rang, startling me back to the present. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I'm really worried about you." Sarah's voice carried that careful tone adult children use when they're trying not to upset an aging parent. "Diana called me this morning, and she's concerned that you've been having some memory issues, maybe some confusion. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully." I clutched the phone tighter. "I'm completely fine. Diana has been documenting normal, everyday mistakes and presenting them as signs of mental illness. I found her notebook. She has an appointment tomorrow to discuss having me committed." Silence stretched across the line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was gentler but more worried than before. "Mom, that sounds a little paranoid. Diana loves you. She's been your best friend for years. Why would she want to hurt you?" The question I'd been asking myself, but hearing it from my own daughter made my chest tighten. "I don't know why, but I know what I found. I can read you the entries if you want." "Mom, maybe you should talk to someone, a professional? Diana said she'd be happy to drive you to an appointment." I could hear Diana's influence in every word, the seeds of doubt already planted and taking root. "Sarah, I need you to trust me on this. Something is very wrong here, and I need your help to figure out what it is." Another long pause. "I'm driving up there tonight. We'll sort this out together, okay?" After we hung up, I sat in Diana's room, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal, wondering how I was going to convince my own daughter that I wasn't losing my mind. The afternoon was slipping away, and Diana would be back soon. I needed a plan, but first, I had to understand what I was really fighting. because looking at months of careful documentation and systematic manipulation, I was beginning to realize this wasn't about concern for my well-being at all. This was about something else entirely, something that would make the truth even more devastating than I could have imagined. I carefully photographed every page of Diana's notebook with my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I documented the evidence. The late afternoon sun was fading, and I knew she'd be back from her errand soon. I returned the notebook to its exact position and went downstairs to wait. When Diana's key turned in the lock 20 minutes later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to appear normal while my heart hammered against my ribs. "How was your day?" she asked, setting down grocery bags with that same bright smile she'd worn for months while documenting my supposed decline. "Fine," I managed. "Just a quiet day at home." Diana began unpacking groceries, chatting about her errands, but I found myself studying her every movement, every expression, searching for clues about her real intentions. This was the woman who had held my hand through my husband's funeral, who had celebrated every birthday and holiday with my family. The woman who was apparently building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent. "Oh, I ran into Mrs. Peterson at the store," Diana said casually. "She mentioned you seemed a bit confused when you talked to her last week." Another entry for her notebook, I realized. I wasn't confused. "We just had a brief conversation about her garden." Diana's pause was almost imperceptible as she placed canned goods in the pantry. "Of course, dear. I just worry sometimes." The word dear suddenly sounded patronizing, like she was already treating me as someone diminished. How long had she been speaking to me this way? "Diana," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about our friendship lately, about how much you do for me. Is there anything you need? Anything I can help you with?" She turned to face me, and for just a moment, something flickered across her features. Guilt? Calculation? It was gone too quickly to interpret. "You're so sweet to ask, but I'm fine. Taking care of you gives my life purpose, especially since my own family lives so far away." The comment struck me as odd. Diana's children lived in different states, but she visited them regularly and seemed content with her independent life. Why would she suddenly need this kind of purpose? My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mom, Diana called me too. She's really worried about you. Maybe you should listen to her." I stared at the message, feeling the walls of Diana's carefully constructed narrative closing in around me. Both my children were now primed to doubt my version of events. If I confronted Diana directly, who would believe me? "Everything all right?" Diana asked, noticing my expression. "Michael's just checking in," I said, forcing a smile while my mind raced. I needed to understand her motivation before Sarah arrived tonight. If Diana was planning something for tomorrow, I had to figure out why. "You know," I said, trying to sound casual, "I was thinking about updating my will soon. Just some small changes, nothing major." Diana's reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and she gripped the can opener a fraction tighter. "Oh? What kind of changes?" "Well, you've been such a good friend. I want to make sure you're taken care of if something happens to me." Now Diana's discomfort was obvious. She set down the can opener and turned away, busying herself with rearranging items that were already perfectly organized. "That's very generous, but completely unnecessary. I'm sure Sarah and Michael will inherit everything, as they should." Her response confirmed my growing suspicion. This wasn't about money or inheritance at all. In fact, the mention of my will seemed to make her uncomfortable, not excited. So what was driving her behavior? "Diana, can I ask you something?" I kept my voice gentle, non-threatening. Have you been happy living here? I know it was supposed to be temporary when you first moved in. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the kitchen window. When she finally spoke, her voice was different somehow, smaller. I love living here. This house. This life we've built together. It's the most stable thing I've had in years. Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. Diana had always seemed so confident, so put together. But now I was seeing something else. Something desperate. You're always welcome here, I said softly. You know that, right? But what if you got sick? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. What if something happened to you? Sarah and Michael would sell the house, and I'd have nowhere to go. I'd be alone again. The pieces began falling into place with devastating clarity. This wasn't about my mental health at all. This was about Diana's terror of being displaced, of losing the home and family she'd found with me. But instead of talking to me about her fears, she'd chosen a path that would guarantee her legal say in my care, my living situation, my future. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the kitchen window. Sarah's car was pulling into the driveway, and I realized with growing dread that I was about to face the most important conversation of my life with my daughter. While Diana watched, still armed with months of carefully documented evidence and both my children's trust. I heard Sarah's key in the front door, followed by Michael's deeper voice. They were both here. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized this was it. The intervention Diana had been orchestrating was happening tonight, not tomorrow. Mom? Diana? Sarah called out. We brought dinner from that Italian place you like. Diana's face had gone pale, but she quickly composed herself. In here, she called back, her voice steady despite everything. Sarah entered the kitchen first, carrying takeout bags, with Michael close behind. The moment I saw their faces, I knew Diana had prepared them well. They wore the careful, gentle expressions people use when they're about to deliver devastating news to someone they believe can't handle it. How are you feeling today, Mom? Sarah asked, setting the bags on the counter. The question was loaded with concern that felt clinical rather than natural. I'm fine, sweetheart. Actually, I'm glad you're both here. I've been wanting to talk with you. Michael exchanged a glance with Diana. That's funny, because we wanted to talk with you too. The kitchen suddenly felt too small for all of us. Diana moved to stand near my children, a subtle but clear alignment that made my stomach drop. Mom? Sarah began carefully. We've all been worried about you lately. Diana's told us about some things that have been happening. What kinds of things? I kept my voice level, though inside I was screaming. Michael pulled out one of the kitchen chairs. Why don't you sit down? I'd rather stand, thank you. I looked directly at Diana. What exactly have you told them? Diana's composure cracked slightly. I told them about the nights you don't sleep, how you've been talking to yourself, the way you've been forgetting conversations we've had. And the paranoia, Sarah added gently. Diana says you've been suspicious of her, thinking she's plotting against you somehow. The irony was so sharp, it took my breath away. Here was Diana, standing with my children after months of actual plotting, calling my growing awareness of her betrayal a symptom of mental illness. What if I told you Diana was right? I said quietly. What if I have been suspicious of her? Mom? Michael's voice was patient but firm. That's exactly what we're talking about. Diana loves you. She's been taking care of you, worrying about you. I looked at my children, really looked at them. Sarah had worry lines I'd never noticed before. Michael looked exhausted. Diana had been sharing her concerns with them for months, and they'd been carrying this weight, believing their mother was losing her mind. "Diana," I said, my voice steady, "show them the notebook." Her face went white. "What notebook?" "The one where you've been documenting everything I say and do. The one you were writing in yesterday when you thought I was napping." Sarah looked confused. "What is she talking about, Diana?" Diana's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "You see," I continued, "you're both right and wrong. Yes, I have been suspicious of Diana, but not because I'm paranoid, because she has actually been plotting something." I turned to my children. "Diana has been documenting my behavior for months, building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent." "That's not true," Diana whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Michael stepped forward. "Mom, even if Diana has been keeping notes about concerning behaviors, that doesn't mean— it means she's been manipulating all of us." I interrupted. "Diana, tell them what you told me 20 minutes ago about why you're doing this." Diana's hands were shaking now. Sarah noticed. "Diana?" Sarah's voice had changed, become questioning. "What is she talking about?" The silence stretched unbearably. Finally, Diana sank into a chair. "I was scared," she whispered. "I was terrified that if something happened to you, your kids would sell the house, and I'd have nowhere to go. I thought if I could show that you needed more care than you were getting, maybe we could arrange something more permanent." Sarah stared at her, processing. "You were building a case against our mother because you were afraid of losing your living situation?" "It's not that simple," Diana said desperately. "I do think she needs help. The sleepless nights are real. The forgetfulness is real." "The sleepless nights," I said quietly, "started when I began noticing you sneaking around the house, making phone calls you thought I couldn't hear, writing in notebooks you hid when I walked into rooms." Michael sank into a chair beside Diana. "Oh my God." Sarah was staring at Diana with an expression I'd never seen before. Hurt, anger, and something like betrayal all mixed together. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you been planning this?" Diana couldn't meet her eyes. "Since the spring." 6 months," Sarah breathed. "You've been manipulating us for 6 months." The takeout bags sat forgotten on the counter as we all stood there, the truth settling around us like dust after an explosion. Everything had changed in the span of 10 minutes, but I realized that nothing had actually changed at all. The manipulation had been there all along. We were just finally seeing it clearly. Sarah turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mom, I am so sorry. We should have talked to you first, should have—" "You were trying to help," I said softly. "Diana made sure you believed I was too fragile to handle a direct conversation." Michael was staring at Diana with something approaching horror. "The intervention we planned for tonight, that wasn't about helping her at all, was it? It was about getting legal control so you could stay in the house." Diana finally looked up, desperate now. "I do love her. I do want what's best for her. It just happened that what I thought was best would also solve my housing problem." The casual admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah stood up abruptly. "I need some air." She walked toward the back door, then stopped and turned around. "Diana, I want you out of this house. Tonight." "Sarah?" Diana started to protest. "Tonight," Sarah repeated, her voice steel. "After what you've put our mother through, after how you've manipulated Michael and me, I want you gone." But as Sarah reached for the door handle, Diana said something that made us all freeze. "You can't make me leave," she said quietly. I have tenants' rights, and I have 6 months of documented evidence that your mother is not competent to make decisions about her own household. The silence that followed Diana's threat was deafening. I watched my daughter's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something that looked like grief. Michael had gone completely still, his hands clenched on his knees. Tenants' rights? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Diana straightened in her chair, and I saw a glimpse of the calculated person who had been living in my house all these months. I've been paying rent. I have receipts. And I have documentation showing that the homeowner has been exhibiting signs of mental decline for months. Any court would question whether she has the capacity to terminate a rental agreement. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. She was going to use her own manufactured evidence against me to stay in my home. I felt something shift inside me, a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. "Get out," I said quietly. Diana turned to me with that familiar concerned expression. "Now see, this is exactly what I mean. You're having an emotional reaction instead of thinking clearly about the legal implications. Get out of my house." My voice was stronger now. "Right now." "Mom?" Sarah started. "No," I said, standing up. "I've listened to enough. Diana, you have systematically manipulated my family, documented my private moments, and created a fictional narrative about my mental state to serve your own purposes. You've made my children believe I was falling apart, while you were the one causing the very symptoms you were documenting." Michael was staring at me with something like amazement. "Mom, you sound completely what? Sane? Clear-headed? Like myself?" I turned to Diana. "Those sleepless nights you documented so carefully?" I was lying awake wondering why someone I trusted was creeping around my house. The forgetfulness? I was distracted because I could feel someone watching me, judging me, waiting for me to make mistakes. Diana's mask was slipping. "You're being paranoid." "No, I was being observed. There's a difference." I walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping there. "You want to talk about documentation?" Sarah looked confused. "What is that?" "My own notes," I said, opening the folder. Dates and times when Diana made phone calls she didn't want me to hear. Times when she moved through the house when she thought I was asleep. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered rooms. I looked directly at Diana. "I may be older, but I'm not stupid. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't figure out what." Michael leaned forward. "You were keeping your own records?" "The same way Diana was keeping hers. Except mine are actually true." I pulled out a page. Tuesday, June 15th, 2:30 a.m. Diana in the kitchen, whispering on the phone. When I came downstairs for water, she claimed she couldn't sleep and was just checking the locks. Diana had gone pale. "You were spying on me?" "I was living in my own house and paying attention to what was happening in it." I flipped to another page. July 8th, Diana rifling through papers in my study. When I asked what she was looking for, she said she was just dusting. Sarah was reading over my shoulder now. "There are dozens of entries here. I started keeping track because I felt like I was going crazy. Everything Diana told you about me was real, but the cause wasn't mental decline. It was living with someone who was systematically undermining my sense of reality." The word hung in the air between us. Gaslighting. That's what this was called. Diana stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're all turning on me because you can't face the truth about her condition." "Stop!" Sarah's voice cut through Diana's protest like a knife. "Just stop talking. Every word out of your mouth makes this worse." Michael was staring at his girlfriend with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of dawning recognition. The day we talked about the intervention, you already had papers prepared. Diana didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. You had guardianship papers printed and ready, he continued, his voice getting quieter. You knew exactly what you wanted the outcome to be before we ever had that conversation. I was being prepared. You were being manipulative, Sarah interrupted. There's a difference. I closed my folder and set it on the counter. Diana, regardless of your tenant's rights or your documentation or anything else, I want you to leave my house tonight. If you choose to fight that legally, that's your decision. But I will not spend one more night under the same roof as someone who has betrayed my trust this completely. Diana looked around the room, perhaps finally realizing that she had miscalculated. Whatever support she thought she might still have from Michael and Sarah had evaporated completely. Mike, she said, turning to him with pleading eyes. You know I care about your mother. Yes, I made mistakes, but my heart was in the right place. Michael stood up slowly. Was it, though? Because I'm starting to think your heart was focused on having a place to live rent-free while you finished school. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Diana's face crumpled, but whether from genuine remorse or from realizing her plan had completely backfired, I couldn't tell. I need my things, she said finally. I'll help you pack, Michael said quietly. And then I'll drive you wherever you need to go. As they headed upstairs, Sarah and I stood in the kitchen surrounded by the forgotten takeout bags and the wreckage of 6 months of manipulation. Mom, Sarah said softly, how did you know? How did you figure it out when we couldn't? Before I could answer, we heard raised voices from upstairs, then the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Michael's voice rose above Diana's, angry in a way I'd rarely heard from my gentle son. Sarah and I looked at each other, and I realized this confrontation was far from over. The shouting upstairs escalated, and I heard what sounded like drawers being yanked open and slammed shut. Sarah and I moved closer to the staircase, straining to make out the words through the old house's thick floors. How could you do this to my mother? Michael's voice carried down clearly, raw with betrayal. She opened her home to you. She treated you like family. Diana's response was muffled, but her tone was defensive, almost shrill. And don't you dare try to make this about caring, Michael continued. You researched involuntary commitment laws, Diana. You had legal documents drawn up. That doesn't happen by accident. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly feeling every one of my 63 years. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to settle in my chest. Sarah pulled out the chair beside me and sat down, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the house. I should have seen it sooner, I said quietly. All those little comments about my memory, the way she'd correct me in front of you kids. She was building a case. She was manipulating all of us, Sarah replied, her voice tight with anger. The way she'd bring up your episodes whenever Michael and I talked about moving out, or when we suggested maybe she should find her own place, she made it sound like you needed constant supervision. A loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by Michael's voice again, louder and more furious than before. Get out. Just take your things and get out. We heard Diana's voice then, pleading, though we couldn't make out her words. Then Michael again, cold and final. No, we're done. Whatever this was between us, it's over. Sarah winced. He really cared about her. I know. I stared at my hands, guilt mixing with the anger in my stomach. I never wanted this to hurt him. When I found those papers in her room, I almost didn't say anything. I kept thinking maybe there was some other explanation. What made you finally decide to confront her? I looked up at my daughter, seeing so much of her father in her steady brown eyes. Yesterday morning, she asked me if I'd like her to drive me to the grocery store. Said she was worried about me navigating the parking lot safely. I've been driving for 45 years, Sarah. I've never had an accident, never even gotten a ticket. But she said it so sweetly, so concerned, that for just a moment, I actually wondered if maybe I shouldn't be driving anymore. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. Mom. That's when I realized how insidious it was. She wasn't just fooling you and Michael. She was starting to convince me that I was incompetent, that I needed someone else to make decisions for my own safety. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying 2 large suitcases. His face was flushed, his usually neat hair disheveled. Diana followed behind him, clutching a backpack and what looked like a laundry basket full of belongings. The kitchen felt smaller with all of us in it, the air thick with tension and unspoken recriminations. Diana's eyes were red-rimmed, but I couldn't tell if she'd been crying from remorse or frustration at being caught. I called an Uber, Michael said shortly, not looking at any of us. It'll be here in 10 minutes. Diana set down her things and turned to face me. Margaret, I want you to know that everything I did was because I was genuinely worried about you. Maybe I went about it the wrong way, but my intentions were good. The words hit me like a slap. Even now, even caught red-handed with forged documents and exposed lies, she was still trying to gaslight me. Your intentions? I said slowly, standing up from my chair, were to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could continue living in my house rent-free while I was locked away in a facility. Don't you dare stand in my kitchen and tell me that was for my own good. Diana's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand the financial pressure I was under. School is expensive, and I couldn't work full-time and maintain my grades. When Michael suggested I move in here, it seemed like the perfect solution for everyone. Until we started talking about her maybe getting her own place when the semester ended, Sarah said coldly. Then suddenly, Mom's condition became much more serious, didn't it? Michael was staring at Diana with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Tell me the truth. How long have you been planning this? Diana hesitated, and in that pause, I saw the calculations still happening behind her eyes. She was still trying to figure out what story would get her the best outcome. Since March, she admitted finally. March, 4 months of systematic manipulation and lies. 4 months of her documenting my every stumble, every forgotten word, every moment of ordinary human fallibility, twisting them into evidence of mental decline. A car honked outside, and Michael picked up the suitcases without a word. But as Diana gathered her remaining belongings, she turned back one more time, and the look in her eyes made my blood run cold. It wasn't remorse or even embarrassment. It was fury. The fury in Diana's eyes sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air drifting through the open front door. This wasn't the face of someone caught in a mistake, or even someone ashamed of their actions. This was the face of someone who felt cheated out of what they believed they deserved. You know what, Margaret? Diana said, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, cold and sharp. Maybe I should have gone through with it. Maybe you really do need someone to make decisions for you, because you're too naive to see what's coming. Sarah stepped between us instinctively. What's that supposed to mean? Diana laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this is over? You think exposing me solves everything? You have no idea how easy it would be to make this happen legitimately." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't been properly extinguished. Michael had stopped in the doorway, the suitcases still in his hands, his face pale. "Diana," he said quietly, "stop talking." But she was beyond listening to reason now. The mask she'd been wearing for months had finally slipped completely, revealing something underneath that made me realize how little I'd actually known about my niece. "Do you know how many doctors I've already talked to about your symptoms?" she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "How many detailed notes I have about your behavior? How many people I've confided in about my concerns for your well-being?" My mouth went dry. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe I approached this the wrong way, but that doesn't mean I was wrong about the underlying problem. And now that you've humiliated me, kicked me out of your house, turned my own brother against me, maybe I don't feel so motivated to keep those concerns private anymore." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Are you threatening my mother?" "I'm stating facts," Diana replied, shouldering her backpack with deliberate calm. "Facts don't disappear just because you don't like them. Neither do medical opinions or professional assessments." The room felt like it was tilting slightly, the same way it had when I first discovered those forged documents. But this time, it wasn't shock causing the sensation. It was the terrible realization that Diana might be right about one thing. This might not be over. Michael set down the suitcases with a heavy thud. "Diana, I need you to explain exactly what you mean by that." "I mean that concerned family members have rights too, Michael. I mean that a pattern of documented behavior doesn't just disappear because Margaret found some papers she didn't like. I mean that there are legal processes designed to protect vulnerable adults, and those processes don't require forged documents or family cooperation." She was still calculating, even now. I could see it in the way her eyes moved between the three of us, assessing our reactions, looking for weaknesses. The Diana I thought I knew had been a performance, and now I was seeing the director behind the scenes. The Uber honked again, more insistently this time. "We need to finish this conversation," Michael said firmly, but Diana was already moving toward the door. "No, we don't. I think everything's been said that needs to be said." She paused in the kitchen doorway and looked back at me one final time. "You might want to think about whether making an enemy of me was really the smart choice here, Margaret. Family loyalty goes both ways." Sarah started to follow her, but I caught her arm. Something told me that confronting Diana while she was in this state would only make things worse. We listened to the sound of the front door opening and closing, followed by car doors slamming and the Uber pulling away. The sudden silence in the kitchen felt heavier than all the shouting that had preceded it. Michael sank into one of the kitchen chairs, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I had no idea she was capable of this. "Which part?" Sarah asked bitterly. "The fraud, the manipulation, or the threats?" "Any of it. All of it." He rubbed his face with both hands. "When she first came to me with concerns about Margaret, I thought she was being a caring family member. I never imagined she was orchestrating the whole thing." I was still processing Diana's parting words, trying to understand the full scope of what she'd implied. "Michael, when she said she'd talked to doctors about my symptoms, what do you think she meant?" He looked up at me, and I saw fear in his eyes. "I don't know, but I think we need to find out." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, marking time that suddenly felt precious and uncertain. Diana was gone, but her threat lingered in the air between us, a promise of battles yet to come. And somewhere in the back of my mind, A new worry began to take shape. If Diana had been planning this since March, what else had she set in motion that we didn't know about yet? Sarah broke the silence first. We need to make a list. Everything Diana said, everything she might have done, everyone she might have talked to. I nodded, grateful for her practical approach, even as my mind reeled. She mentioned doctors, plural, and she's been at this since March. That's 4 months of laying groundwork. Michael stood up slowly, moving to the kitchen counter where I kept a notepad. Let's start with what we know for certain. Diana had documents prepared for involuntary commitment. She'd spoken to family members about your mental state. She'd documented what she called concerning behaviors. And she'd talked to medical professionals, I added, the words tasting bitter. She seemed very confident about that part. Sarah pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm making notes too. We need to think about this systematically. Diana's smart, and she's been planning this for months. She wouldn't have shown her hand today if she didn't think she had backup plans. The reality of our situation was starting to sink in. Diana hadn't just been caught and defeated. She'd been forced to reveal her strategy earlier than planned. That didn't mean she was giving up. Margaret, Michael said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Have you seen any doctors recently? Had any appointments Diana might know about? I thought back through the spring and early summer. Just my annual physical in April, and I saw Dr. Peterson for that persistent headache issue in May. Nothing unusual, no concerning results. Who's Dr. Peterson? Sarah asked. My primary care doctor. I've been seeing him for years. A cold realization hit me. Diana drove me to that appointment. She insisted on coming with me because of the headaches. She was in the waiting room when I checked in. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. What did you tell Dr. Peterson about the headaches? Michael asked. I tried to remember the exact conversation. That I'd been having trouble sleeping, feeling stressed about work. The headaches were worse in the morning. I mentioned feeling overwhelmed sometimes, having trouble concentrating. All completely normal stress symptoms, Sarah said firmly. But Diana was there when you checked in? Yes, and she made a point of talking to the receptionist. Something about updating my emergency contacts. The memory felt different now, tainted by everything I'd learned. She said she wanted to make sure she was listed as someone who could get information about my care. Michael set down his pen. That's how she got access to medical information. If she's listed as an emergency contact with medical authorization, Dr. Peterson's office might have shared details about your visit. But that's not enough for commitment proceedings, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. No, but it's documentation. A record of you reporting stress, sleep problems, concentration issues, feeling overwhelmed, in the right hands, presented the right way. Sarah trailed off, but we all understood. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as I realized how thoroughly I'd been set up. Every conversation with Diana over the past months took on new meaning. Her concerned questions about my sleep, her observations about my mood, her gentle suggestions that I seemed to be struggling. It hadn't been sisterly care. It had been evidence gathering. There's something else, I said quietly. Last month, Diana suggested I talk to someone, a therapist. She said she was worried about me and had gotten the name of someone who might help. Michael's expression darkened. Did you call? No, I told her I was fine, that the work stress was temporary. She seemed disappointed. I felt sick as the pieces continued falling into place. She probably had that therapist ready to document whatever she needed documented. Sarah was typing rapidly on her phone. This is good. We're mapping out her strategy. The more we understand what she was planning, the better we can protect you. But she's still out there, I said. She made it clear this isn't over, and she's had months to set things up. We're just figuring out the scope of it now. Michael returned to his chair, looking thoughtful. Margaret, I need you to think carefully. Over the past few months, has Diana been present for any other medical appointments, family conversations, interactions with neighbors or co-workers? Any situation where she might have positioned herself as the concerned family member, worried about your well-being? The question opened a floodgate of memories I'd dismissed as Diana being helpful and caring. Her insistence on accompanying me to my dentist appointment when I mentioned feeling anxious about a root canal. The way she'd lingered to chat with my next-door neighbor about how I'd seemed withdrawn lately. Her casual questions about my work performance, my relationships, my daily routines. Oh, God, I whispered. She's been building a case against me for months, and I helped her do it. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. You didn't help her do anything. You trusted someone you thought cared about you. That's not a character flaw, Margaret. But even as she spoke, I could see the concern in her eyes. We were all beginning to understand that Diana's threat hadn't been empty bluster. She really had been laying groundwork, and we had no idea how extensive that groundwork might be. The phone rang, making all three of us jump. I stared at the ringing phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent kitchen, each ring stretching longer than the last. Should I answer it? I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was whispering. Michael held up a hand. Let it ring. If it's important, they'll leave a message. But the phone kept ringing. 5 rings, 6, 7. Whoever was calling wasn't giving up easily. Sarah was watching me carefully. Margaret, you don't have to answer anything you don't want to answer. Remember that. On the 8th ring, I reached for the phone. I couldn't stand the suspense anymore. Hello? Margaret, honey, it's Diana. My blood turned to ice water. Michael and Sarah were both leaning forward, watching my face. I knew my expression was giving everything away. Hi, Diana. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out strained. I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, and I feel terrible about how things went. I was hoping we could talk again. I'm worried I didn't explain myself very well. The reasonable tone, the concerned sister act, it was exactly what I would have fallen for this morning. But now, knowing what I knew, I could hear something else underneath it. A careful calculation in the way she chose her words. I'm not sure there's anything more to discuss, I said. Oh, but there is, sweetie. I've been making some calls this afternoon. You know, reaching out to people who care about you, getting some perspective on the situation. My stomach dropped. What kind of calls? Diana's voice remained sweetly concerned, but there was steel underneath now. Well, I spoke with Dr. Peterson's office about that appointment you missed last month, and I had a lovely chat with your supervisor about how you've been managing your workload lately. The room started spinning slightly. Dr. Peterson was my primary care physician. I had missed an appointment. I'd been dealing with a work crisis and completely forgotten about it. And my supervisor? I'd been struggling with a difficult project, nothing unusual, but Diana could have easily spun that into something more concerning. You had no right to contact my doctor or my work, I said, but my voice came out weaker than I intended. Oh, honey, I have every right to be concerned about my sister. Especially when the people in your life are telling me the same things I've been noticing. Everyone's worried, Margaret. Michael was making urgent hand gestures at me, but I couldn't focus on what he was trying to communicate. The walls felt like they were closing in. "I think we should meet tomorrow," Diana continued. "Just you and me. Maybe somewhere neutral, where we can really talk this through. I've found a wonderful facility that specializes in helping people who are going through what you're going through. Very discreet, very comfortable. We could just take a tour, see what you think." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. There was a pause. When Diana spoke again, the sweetness was gone from her voice entirely. "Margaret, I really think you should reconsider. Because if you won't get help voluntarily, there are other options, and I've been documenting everything very carefully. Your missed appointments, your work performance, your increasingly erratic behavior. I have witnesses who will testify about their concerns." My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Diana, please. I'll call you tomorrow morning. Think about what I've said. Think about what's best for everyone." The line went dead. I set the phone down with trembling hands and looked at Michael and Sarah. They were both staring at me with expressions of growing alarm. "She's already started making calls," I said quietly. "She's contacted my doctor and my supervisor. She says she has witnesses who will testify about their concerns." Sarah's face had gone pale. "This is escalating faster than we thought." Michael was already reaching for his notebook again. "What exactly did she say about witnesses?" But before I could answer, the phone rang again. I stared at the ringing phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah reached over and gently placed her hand on mine before I could pick it up. "You don't have to answer it," she said softly. "It might not even be her." But something told me it was. The timing felt too deliberate, too calculated. I let it ring 4 more times before finally picking up. "Margaret, it's me again." Diana's voice was different now, more businesslike. "I forgot to mention something important. I've scheduled that appointment I mentioned for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. The intake coordinator is expecting us." "Diana, I never agreed to any appointment?" "Well, you will, because I also forgot to mention that I've been in touch with our Aunt Patricia about our concerns. She's very worried about you too, especially after I told her about the incident at Mom's birthday last year." My stomach dropped. There had been no incident at Mom's birthday. I'd been perfectly fine that day. We'd had a lovely dinner, played cards, laughed until our sides hurt. But Diana could spin anything. "There was no incident," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Patricia remembers it differently. She said she was quite concerned about some of the things you said that evening. Very concerning things about people watching you, following you. Ring a bell?" I felt like I was drowning. I had never said anything like that. Ever. But Patricia lived 3 states away and only saw us once or twice a year. If Diana had called her with a convincing story. "I never said those things." "Margaret, this is exactly what I'm talking about. The memory issues, the paranoia. It's getting worse. Patricia agrees that immediate intervention is necessary." Michael was frantically scribbling something in his notebook and held it up. "She's lying. You know she's lying." I nodded at him, trying to anchor myself to what I knew was true. "Diana, I'm not going to any appointment tomorrow, and I'm not going to continue this conversation." "Fine." Her voice turned ice cold. "Then I'll proceed with the involuntary commitment process. Patricia has agreed to co-sign the petition. We have enough documentation now, and with your refusal to seek help voluntarily, we have grounds for emergency intervention." The phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my hand. "You can't just have someone committed because you feel like it." "Actually, I can. Especially when they're exhibiting clear signs of paranoid delusions, like believing their own sister is conspiring against them. I'll be in touch about the time and location where you need to appear." She hung up. I set the phone down and looked at Michael and Sarah. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. "She's really doing this," I whispered. "She's actually trying to have me committed." Sarah moved closer to me on the couch. "Margaret, listen to me. What she described, what she's claiming you said at your mother's birthday, did any of that happen?" "No, none of it. I remember that day perfectly. We had such a good time. I was completely normal." Michael looked up from his notebook. "She's counting on the fact that it would be your word against hers and Patricia's. But there's something she's not considering." "What?" "She's been so focused on building her case that she's left a trail. Those phone calls she made to your doctor and supervisor? Those were inappropriate. She had no authorization to discuss your private information with them. And if she lied to them or misrepresented the situation, that's going to backfire on her." Sarah nodded slowly. "And this conversation we just heard, where she's essentially threatening you with false imprisonment based on fabricated evidence? Michael, weren't you recording this on your phone?" Michael held up his device. "Every word." For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe properly. "So what do we do now?" "Now," Michael said, "we get ahead of this. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call your doctor and your supervisor yourself. You're going to explain exactly what's happening and ask them what Diana said to them. I guarantee you'll find out she either exaggerated wildly or outright lied." Sarah squeezed my hand. "And then we're going to contact Patricia together and find out what Diana actually told her. I'm betting she fed her a completely different story than what really happened." I felt tears starting to form, but for the first time tonight, they were tears of relief rather than fear. "You really think we can stop this?" "I don't think it," Michael said firmly. "I know it. Diana's biggest mistake was assuming you'd be facing this alone. But you're not alone, and we're not going to let her get away with this." The phone started ringing again, but this time, I didn't even look at it. "Let it ring," I said. "I've heard enough from her for one night." As the ringing finally stopped, Sarah smiled at me. "Tomorrow, we take control of this situation. Tonight, you're safe, and you're not alone." For the first time all evening, I believed her.